Well, hello there, and welcome to my kitchen table. A place in most homes where we can sit with family and friends and just talk for hours. Let's see where we're off to today. We're off to London, and as you may or may not know, the City of London is the capital city of the UK. It has around 10 million residents, and it's home to the ruling monarch, which at the moment is King Charles III, and the country's Prime Minister, but that changes every couple of months, so it's not worth mentioning a name there. It's also where this story is based. So, if you're ready, take a seat and I'll tell you a story. Dennis Andrew Nilsen was born on the 23rd of November 1945 in Fraserburgh, Aberdeenshire in Scotland. The second of three children born to Elizabeth White and Olav Magnus Moksheim, or Moksheim, who adopted the surname of Nilsen. Good on him. He was a Norwegian soldier who had travelled to Scotland in 1940 with, or rather as part of the Free Norwegian Forces. After a brief courtship, he married Elizabeth White in May 1942, and the newlyweds moved into her parents' home. Nilsen was a quiet yet adventurous child. His earliest memories were of family picnics in the Scottish countryside with his mother and his brother and sister, and of being taken on long countryside walks carried on the shoulders of his maternal grandfather, to whom he was particularly close. Nilsen's grandfather sadly died on the 31st of October 1951 while fishing in the North Sea. He died of a heart attack at the age of 62, and his body was actually brought ashore and returned to the White family prior to the burial. In what Nilsen described as his most vivid childhood recollection, his mother, weeping, asked him whether he wanted to see his grandfather. When he replied that he did, he was taken into the room where his grandfather lay in an open coffin. As Nilsen gazed upon the body, his mother told him that his grandfather was sleeping and added, "He's gone to a better place." In the years following the death of his grandfather, Nilsen became quieter and more withdrawn. He often talked to or played games with his younger sister, Sylvia, to whom he was closer than any other family member. At the onset of puberty, Nilsen discovered he was gay, which initially confused and shamed him. He kept his sexuality hidden from his family and his few friends, because many of the boys to whom he was attracted had facial features similar to those of his younger sister, Sylvia. On one occasion, he sexually fondled Sylvia, believing that his attraction towards boys might be a manifestation of the care that he felt for her. That's one confused kid. Nilsen made no efforts to seek sexual contact with any of his peers to whom he was sexually attracted, although he did later say that he had been fondled by an older youth and he didn't find the experience unpleasant. On one occasion, he also caressed and fondled the body of his older brother as he slept. As a result of this, Olav Jr. began to suspect his brother was gay and regularly belittled him in public. Nilsen initially believed that his fondling of his sister may have been evidence that he was bisexual. No, it's just evidence that you are a pervert and you actually carried out a sexual assault on your kid sister. At the age of 14, Nilsen joined the Army Cadet Force, viewing the British Army as a potential avenue for escape in his rural origins. Nilsen's school record was above average. He displayed a flair for history and art, but no attempts were made to participate in sports. He finished his schooling in 1961 and briefly worked in a canning factory as he considered which career path he should choose. After 3 weeks at the factory, it was short, wasn't it? After 3 weeks at the factory, Nilsen informed his mother that he was going to join the army, where he intended to train as a chef. Nilsen passed the entrance examinations and received official notification that he was to enlist for 9 years' service in September 1961, commencing his training with the Army Catering Corps at St Omar Barracks in Aldershot in Hampshire in the UK. Within weeks, Nilsen began to excel in his army duties. He later described his 3 years of training at Aldershot as the happiest of his life. He relished the travel opportunities afforded him in his training and recalled as highlights his regiment taking part in the ceremonial parade attended by both Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II and Field Marshal Lord Montgomery of Alamein. While stationed at Aldershot, Nilsen's latent feelings began to stir, but he kept his sexual orientation well hidden from his colleagues. He never showered in the company of fellow soldiers for fear of developing an erection in their presence, instead opting to bathe alone in the bathroom, which also afforded him the privacy to masturbate. In mid-1964, Nilsen passed his initial catering exam and was officially assigned to the 1st Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers in Osnabrück in West Germany, where he served as a private. In this deployment, Nilsen began to increase his alcoholic intake. He described himself and his colleagues as hard-working, boozy lot. His colleagues recalled he often drank in excess in order to ease his shyness. On one occasion, Nilsen and a German youth drank themselves into a stupor. When Nilsen awoke, he found himself on the floor of the German youth's flat. No sexual activity had occurred, but this incident fueled Nilsen's sexual fantasies, which usually involved his sexual partner, invariably a young, slender male, being completely passive. These fantasies gradually evolved into his partner being unconscious or even dead. Following 2 years of service in Osnabrück, Nilsen returned to Aldershot, where he passed his official catering exam before being deployed to serve as a cook in the British Army in Norway. In 1967, he was deployed to the state of Aden, formerly Aden Colony, now part of Yemen, where he again served as a cook. At the Al-Mansoura prison. This posting was more dangerous than his previous postings in West Germany or Norway, and Nilsen later recalled his regiment losing several men, often in ambushes en route to the army barracks. Nilsen was kidnapped by an Arab taxi driver who beat him unconscious and placed him in the boot of his car. Upon being dragged out of the boot, Nilsen grabbed a jack handle and knocked the taxi driver to the ground before beating him unconscious. He then locked the man in the boot of his own car, the taxi, and left him there and walked away. Unlike his previous postings, Nilsen had his own room while stationed in Aden. This meant he had privacy for playing with himself without discovery. His developed fantasies of sex with an unresistant or deceased partner unfulfilled, Nilsen compensated by imagining sexual encounters with an unconscious body as he played with himself while looking at his own nude body in a mirror. Twisted, huh? These fantasies gradually evolved to incorporate his own near-death experience with the Arab taxi driver, the dead bodies he'd seen in Aden, and imagery within a 19th century oil painting entitled The Raft of the Medusa, which depicts an old man holding the limp nude body of a dead youth as he sits aside a dismembered body of another male. In Nilsen's most vividly recalled fantasy, a slender, attractive young blonde soldier who had been recently killed in battle is dominated by a faceless, dirty, grey-haired old man who washed his body before engaging in intercourse with the spread eagle corpse. Blows me away, really does, just blows me away. When Nilsen completed his deployment in Aden, he returned to the UK and was assigned to serve with the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders at Seaton Barracks in Plymouth in Devon. Nilsen served at these barracks for 1 year before being transferred with the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders to Cyprus in 1969. Months later, the regiment was transferred to West Berlin, where, the same year, Nilsen had his first sexual encounter with a female. A prostitute whose services Nilsen had actually solicited. He bragged of his sexual encounter to his colleagues, but later stated he found intercourse with a female both overrated and depressing. Following a brief period with the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders in Inverness, Nilsen was selected to cook for the Queen's Royal Guard, then for a different regiment in January in 1971 in the Shetland Isles in Scotland. That's like way north. And this is where he entered his 11-year military career at the rank of corporal in October 1972. Between October and December of that year, Nilsen lived with his family as he considered his next career move. On one occasion, he joined his older brother Olav Jr., his sister-in-law and another couple to watch a documentary about gay men. Yeah, great choice of viewing. All present viewed the topic with derision, except Nilsen, who ardently spoke in defence of gay rights. A fight ensued, after which Olav Jr. informed his mother that Dennis was gay. Nilsen never spoke to his older brother again and maintained only sporadic written contact with his mother, stepfather and younger siblings. He decided to join the Metropolitan Police and moved to London in December of 72 and began the training course. In April 1973, Nilsen completed his police training course and was posted to Willesden Green. Still a cadet and junior constable, he performed several arrests, but never had to physically subdue a member of the public. He enjoyed the work, but missing the comradeship of the army, he began to drink alone in the evenings. During the summer and autumn of 1973, Nilsen began frequenting gay pubs and engaged in several casual liaisons with men. He viewed these encounters as soul-destroying liaisons, in which he would only lend his partner his body in a vain search for inner peace. He's got away with words, hasn't he? Because he sought a lasting relationship. In August, following a failed relationship, Nilsen came to the conclusion that his personal lifestyle was at odds with his job. His birth father died the same month, leaving each of his 3 children £1,000, the equivalent of about £10,000 now. In December, Nilsen resigned from the police, so he wasn't with them long. Between December 1973 and May 1974, Nilsen worked as a security guard. The work was intermittent, and he resolved to find more stable, secure employment. He found work as a civil servant in May 1972, and he was posted to a job centre in Denmark Street in London. In June 1982, he was transferred to another job centre in Kentish Town, where he worked right up until his arrest. In November 1975, Nilsen saw a 20-year-old man named David Gallican being threatened outside a pub by two other men. Nilsen intervened and took Gallican to his room at 80 Teignmouth Road in the Cricklewood district of North London. The two men spent the evening drinking and talking. Nilsen learned that Gallican had recently moved to London from Weston-super-Mare in Somerset, and he was gay, unemployed, and residing in a hostel. The following morning, both men agreed to live together in a larger residence, and Nilsen, using part of the inheritance bequeathed to him by his father, immediately resolved to find a larger property. Several days later, the pair viewed a vacant ground floor flat at 195 Melrose Avenue, also in Cricklewood, and they decided to move into the property. Prior to moving into Melrose Avenue, Nilsen negotiated a deal with the landlord where he and Gallican had exclusive use of the garden to the rear of the property. The Melrose Avenue flat was supposed to be furnished, but upon moving in, they actually found that it was largely threadbare. It was nothing. Over the following months, the couple redecorated and furnished the entire flat. Initially, Nilsen experienced domestic contentment with Gallican, but within a year of their moving into Melrose Avenue, the superficial relationship between the two men began to show signs of strain. They slept in separate beds, and both begun to bring casual sex partners home. The pair had begun arguing with increasing frequency by early 1976. Nilsen later stated that following a heated argument in May 1977, he demanded that Gallican leave the residence. Although Gallican actually informed investigators at one point that it was his idea to leave. Nilsen had brief relationships with several other young men over the following 18 months. None of these relationships lasted more than a few weeks, though, and none of the men expressed any intention to stay with him on a permanent basis. By late 1978, he was living a solitary existence and felt that he was unfit to live with. Throughout 1978, he devoted an ever-increasing amount of time and effort, most evenings, to consuming spirits or lager and listening to music. Between 1978 and 1983, Nilsen is known to have killed a minimum of 12 men and boys, and to have attempted to kill 7 others. He initially confessed in 1983 to having killed about 16 victims. The majority of Nilsen's victims were homeless or gay men. Others were heterosexual people he typically met in bars, on public transport, or on one occasion, right outside his front door. All of Nilsen's murders were committed inside the 2 North London addresses that he had, where he resided in the years he is known to have killed. His victims were lured to these addresses, typically by the offer of alcohol or shelter. Nilsen admitted to engaging in masturbation, as he viewed the nude bodies of several of his victims, and to have engaged in sexual acts with 6 of his victims' bodies, but he was adamant that he never penetrated any of his victims. Dennis Nilsen killed his first victim, 14-year-old Stephen Holmes, on the 30th of December 1978. Holmes met Nilsen in the Cricklewood Arms pub, where Holmes had unsuccessfully attempted to purchase alcohol. He was only 14. According to Nilsen, he had been drinking heavily alone in the day when he met Holmes, before deciding in the evening that he must at all costs get out of the flat and seek some company. Nilsen invited Holmes to his house, on the promise of the two drinking alcohol and listening to music, believing him to be approximately 17 years old. At Nilsen's home, both he and Holmes drank heavily before they fell asleep. The following morning, Nilsen awoke to find the sleeping Holmes beside him in his bed. In his subsequent written confessions, Nilsen stated that he was afraid to wake him in case he left me. After caressing and sleeping the sleeping youth, Nilsen decided Holmes was to stay with me forever. Well, over New Year, whether he wanted to or not. Reaching for a necktie, Nilsen straddled Holmes as he strangled him into unconsciousness before drowning the teenager in a bucket filled with water. Nilsen then washed the body in his bathtub before placing Holmes on his bed and caressing his body. He twice masturbated over the body before awaiting the passing of rigor mortis. Because I don't know if you know, like, rigor mortis comes on and then goes away. So, awaiting the passing of rigor mortis to enable him to stow the corpse beneath his floorboards. Holmes' bound corpse remained beneath the floorboards for almost 8 months. Before Nilsen built a bonfire in the garden behind his flat and burned the body on the 11th of August 1979. Nilsen's written recollections of the ritual he carried out after the murder of his first victim. Neil stated that, having killed Holmes, I eased him into his new bed beneath the floorboards. A week later, I wondered whether his body had changed at all, or had started to decompose maybe. I disinterred him and pulled the dirt-stained youth up onto the floor. His skin was very dirty. I stripped myself naked and carried him into the bathroom and washed his body. There was practically no discoloration, and his skin was pale white. His limbs were more relaxed than when I put him down there. I caused dreams which caused death. This is my crime. Adding that he had started down the avenue of death and possession of a new kind of flatmate. On the 11th of October 1979, Nilsen attempted to murder a student from Hong Kong named Andrew Ho, whom he met at a St Martin's Lane pub and lured to his flat on the promise of sex. Nilsen's attempted to strangle Ho, who managed to flee from the flat and reported the incident to the police. Nilsen was questioned in relation to the incident, but Ho decided eventually not to press charges. 10 months after the attempted murder of Ho, on the 3rd of December 1979, Nilsen encountered a 23-year-old Canadian student named Kenneth Ockenden, who had been on a tour of England visiting relatives. Nilsen met Ockenden as they both drank in a West End pub. Upon learning the young man was a tourist, Nilsen offered to show Ockenden several London landmarks, an offer which Ockenden accepted. Nilsen then invited the student to his house on the promise of a meal and further drinks. The pair stopped off at an off-licence en route to Nilsen's residence and purchased whiskey, rum and beer, with Ockenden insisting on sharing the bill. Nilsen was adamant he could not recall the precise moment he strangled Ockenden, but recalled that he strangled the young man with the cord of his headphones, of Nilsen's headphones, as Ockenden listened to music. He also recalled dragging Ockenden across the floor with the wire wrapped around his neck as he strangled him, before pouring himself half a glass of rum and continuing to listen to music on the headphones which he had just strangled Ockenden with. The following day, Nilsen purchased a Polaroid camera and photographed Ockenden's body in various suggestive positions. He then laid Ockenden's corpse spread eagle above him on the bed as he watched television for several hours before wrapping up the body in plastic bags and stowing the corpse beneath the floorboards. The guy is just... oh, I shouldn't laugh really because it's just so sad. On approximately 4 occasions over the following fortnight, Nilsen disinterred Ockenden's body from beneath his floorboards and seated the body upon his armchair alongside him as he himself watched television and drank alcohol. See what I mean? Crazy. Nilsen killed his third victim, a 16-year-old Martin Duffy, on the 17th of May 1980. Martin Duffy was a catering student from Birkenhead, Merseyside, who had hitchhiked to London without his parents' knowledge. On the 13th of May, after being questioned by British Transport Police for evading his train fare. For 4 days, Duffy slept rough near Euston Railway Station, that's in London, before Nilsen met the youth as he returned from a union conference in Southport. Duffy, Nilsen recollected, was both exhausted and hungry, and happily accepted Nilsen's offer of a meal and a bed for the night. After the youth had fallen asleep in Nilsen's bed, Nilsen fashioned a ligature around his neck, then simultaneously sat on Duffy's chest and tightened the ligature with great force. He then dragged the youth to the kitchen and drowned him in the sink before bathing his body. He was also in the bath, which he recollected as being the youngest looking I've ever had. Duffy's body was first placed upon a kitchen chair, then upon the bed on which he had been strangled. The body was repeatedly kissed, complimented and caressed by Nilsen, both before and after he had masturbated while sitting upon the stomach of the corpse. For 2 days, Duffy's body was stowed in a cupboard before Nilsen noted signs of bloating. Therefore, he went straight under the floorboards. Following Duffy's murder, Nilsen began to kill with increasing frequency. Before the end of 1980, he killed a further 5 victims and attempted to murder 1 other. Nilsen's recollections of the unidentified victims were vague, but he graphically recalled how each victim had been murdered and just how long the body had been retained for before dissection. One unidentified victim, killed in November, had moved his legs in a cycling motion as he was strangled. Nilsen is known to have been absent from work between the 11th and the 18th of November, likely due to this particular murder. Another unidentified victim, Nilsen had unsuccessfully attempted to resuscitate before sinking to his knees and sobbing, then spitting on his own image as he looked at himself in the mirror. On one occasion, he had lain in bed alongside the body of an unidentified victim as he listened to the classical theme fanfare for the common man before bursting into tears. Inevitably, the accumulated bodies beneath Nilsen's floorboard attracted insects and created a foul odour, particularly throughout summer months. On occasions when Nilsen disinterred victims from beneath the floorboards, he noted that the bodies were covered in pupae and infested with maggots. Some victims' heads had maggots crawling out of the eye sockets and mouths, he said. He placed air fresheners beneath the floorboards and sprayed insecticide around the flat twice daily, but the odour of decay and the presence of flies remained. In late 1980, Nilsen removed and dissected the bodies of each victim killed since December 1979 and burned them upon a communal bonfire he had constructed on waste ground near his flat. To disguise the smell of the burning flesh of the 6 dissected bodies, Nilsen crowned the bonfire with an old car tyre. And Nilsen later wrote in his memoirs that he felt it would have seemed in order if he had seen 3 children dancing around a mass funeral pyre. When the bonfire had been reduced to ashes and cinders, Nilsen used a rake to search the debris for any recognisable bones. Noting a skull was still intact, he smashed it to pieces with his rake. Right, I've got next what is actually an extract from Nilsen's prison journals, written while he was on remand. This is before he was sentenced in 1983. I could only relate to a dead image of the person I could love. The image of my dead grandfather would be the model of him at his most striking in my mind. It seems necessary for them to have been dead in order that I could express some feelings which were the feelings I held sacred for my grandfather. It was a pseudo-sexual, infantile love which had not yet developed and matured. The sight of them, my victims, brought me a bitter sweetness and a temporary peace and fulfilment. Yeah, okay. On or about the 4th of January 1981, Nilsen encountered an unidentified man who he described for investigators as an 18-year-old blue-eyed young Scot at the Golden Lion pub in Soho. He was lured to Melrose Avenue, to Nilsen's flat, upon the promise of partaking in a drinking contest. After Nilsen and his victim had consumed several beverages, Nilsen strangled him with a tie and subsequently placed his body beneath the floorboards. He'd just got rid of them all now, but he puts another one there. Nilsen is known to have informed his employers that he was ill and unable to attend work on the 12th of January, in order that he could dissect both this victim and another unidentified victim he had killed approximately 1 month earlier. By April, Nilsen had killed 2 further unidentified victims, one of whom he described as an English skinhead who he'd met in Leicester Square, and the other is described as Belfast Boy, a man in his early 20s, approximately 5'9" or 1.75 metres in height, whom he had murdered sometime in February. In relation to the first, of these 3 unidentified victims, he later casually reflected, "End of the day, end of the drink, end of a person. Floorboards back, carpet replaced, and back to work at Denmark Street." Just another day for him. The following month, Nilsen removed the internal organs of several victims stowed beneath his floorboards and discarded these innards both upon the waste ground behind his flat and in his household rubbish. The final victim to be murdered at Melrose Avenue was 23-year-old Malcolm Barlow. Nilsen discovered him slumped up against the wall right outside his house on the 17th of September 1981. When Nilsen asked Barlow if he was okay and could he help, he was informed the medication Barlow was taking, which was prescribed for his epilepsy, had caused his legs to weaken. Nilsen suggested Barlow should be in hospital and supported him, walking him into his residence before phoning for an ambulance. The following day, Barlow was released from hospital and returned to Nilsen's home, apparently to thank him. He was invited in, and after eating a meal, he began drinking rum and coke before falling asleep on the sofa. Nilsen manually strangled Barlow as he slept, before stowing his body beneath the kitchen sink. The following morning, right, as this is a 2-parter, I'm going to finish that one, this one, there. Okay, so thank you very much for listening so far. My mouth's really dry. I really need a cup of coffee. Part 2 will be available to view directly after this. They are both being posted the same day, like I did with Hillsborough. Okay, so they're both being posted the same day, so you can watch part 2 directly after part 1, and the link to part 2 will be in the description box in part 1. Okay, brilliant. So I've been Sue, and for now, TTFN.